Hi, this is Paul, and welcome to the first edition of my new podcast, Danger Ahead. Before I get into the meat of the podcast, I want to give you a little forward to understand where I'm coming from and give you an idea of what this podcast might be about. I've been around a long time, but throughout history, we have seen the battle between good and evil, and sometimes good is ahead in that race, sometimes evil is. And you have to understand that battle will continue to go on because every culture, every person, everyone alive has been molded by their culture, their parents, and other influencers. So, to some people, especially evil people, power is very intoxicating, and they want more and more of it. And to good people, it's intoxicating in a different way. They want to get a message out that shows that they want to serve humanity and are dedicated to the good of the whole rather than to the good of the one. And throughout history, we've seen dictators from Genghis Khan to Idi Amin to Hitler to the guy Saddam Hussein. I can go on, but you know what I'm talking about. And all those people were basically ones that found power very intoxicating and would love to have world domination if it was possible. And so now we come to the year 2020, and we're confronted with, probably in my lifetime, I can't remember a year where we have been confronted with more dangers than since I've been born, which was back in 1950. We have a global pandemic that is killing anywhere from that is infecting anywhere from 50 to 70,000 people a day, over 220,000 deaths in our country alone. We have a man that's president of the United States that has made it comfortable for people who, and I'm talking about people who are racist, sexist, things like that, have made it comfortable for them to come from behind the shadow and actually blatantly show that they are racist, sexist, among other things. The other thing I want this podcast to do is show that there is a certain method to Trump's madness, and it's basically brainwashing. I had a friend 10 years older than me now, and I believe he's passed away, but he used to deprogram Vietnam-era veterans coming back from Vietnam who had been brainwashed in some way, shape, or fashion. And he also later on worked as a person that, if you remember when all these kids, young teenagers and young people were getting caught up in all these different cults, and their parents would hire these people to go in and kidnap them from the cults and then deprogram them. He was one of those people too, and there's all sorts of different ways that you brainwash people, but one of the biggest telltale signs is it can happen over a very long period of time, and when you're trying to have a conversation with someone of some meaning, in other words, a conversation, not a vehement argument, not insulting each other, but just trying to figure out, why you don't see what I see. And invariably, when I have made certain comments on certain websites and stuff about, I don't understand. I just don't understand why 100 million people roughly in this country cannot, I guess, see through the transparency of Trump and his constant lying, his constant self-serving, and the fact that he would love to be a dictator and eventually dominate this country, if not the world. And it's baffling to me because I have friends that support him, and they're going to remain friends no matter what. No matter what they say to me, I'm not going to get offended. But the fact is, I'm trying to understand it psychologically because there's another 100 or so million people in the world that think like I do, that see right through this guy. Okay? And they're all in a quandary. I guess the best thing I could say at this point in time is I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist by any means. In fact, as far as formal education, it's very, very limited, just like guess who? Donald Trump. And but if you want to find out how he was molded, how this guy came to be, and all the different facets of his I don't know, lying, evil personality, then it might help you to read Marielle Trump's book that she wrote, How My Family Created the Most Dangerous Man in America. She's a PhD in psychology, and when I read that book, it's a very good read. It's 200 pages, and it just showed a lot of reasons why this all happened. Secondly, I want to say that corruption and the need for power doesn't stay at the highest levels. It goes all the way down to normal people that live their everyday lives. When I used to be a salesman for a large corporation, I was a part of a group of priority account executives, and I was known for speaking out very loudly when I thought the company was doing something that bordered on unethical or something that was just wrong. And I became, quote unquote, the leader of my certain group of priority account executives. And I recall one time the head of the department came to me and said, Paul, you have a way of articulating things so well, and that people follow you and listen to you, and we really appreciate that talent. But in fact, I think we would like you to be more pro-company and stop fighting a lot of the things we want to do. And I just basically responded, and then this will be the end of the forward. But I basically responded to them by saying, okay, I can be pro-company, but if it's matters I don't believe in, I could sit there and go ahead and give a speech pretending that I believe in them, but anyone that knows me could see right through me. So when I'm giving a speech about something I firmly believe in, they can see me and who I am, and that's what drew them to me, because I wasn't afraid of losing my job. Anyway, let's kind of continue with the podcast here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be looking for people's comments and on certain quotes from Trump, books about Trump that I read. And I welcome comments from anybody as long as they're done in a tactful, respectful manner, and none of this hate crap and stuff like that. But I want to give you an idea of who Trump really is. And the first book I chose to read from was Disloyal, a memoir by Michael Cohen, who was Trump's lawyer, right-hand man, the guy that handled all the dirty stuff until until he got convicted of lying to Congress. And by the way, thank you very much, Sacha Baron Cohen, for your great portrayal of Rudy Giuliani, who has succeeded Michael Cohen in being Trump's consigliere, so to speak, like the mafia has. Okay, so and the other reason I chose to use this book is because he finally realized he was at the end of his rope. He realized he got brainwashed. He realized that he almost lost his beloved family and his daughters and son, and he also realized that he wasn't the most righteous man in the world, but at the same time, he also realized, after finally breaking the spell Trump had over him, that how dangerous Trump really was. So this first podcast will be somewhat long. I hope you can bear through it, and then I'm really welcoming your comments. I will also post this on YouTube, where a lot of political stuff goes back and forth, and I'll welcome your comments there or on YouTube and Facebook. Okay, here we go. Here's number one quote, and it's kind of a long one. My contributions were intermittent, but occasionally I offered my assistance or opinion. This is Michael Cohen talking. And he goes on to say, I'll never know the full truth on this matter, but I know that I was watching one of Trump's rallies on television one night during the spring when it struck me that every single person in the stands in the background was white. All the grinning rednecks with the red MAGA hats, the moms in the MAGA t-shirts, the gap-toothed kids waving to the camera. The Trump heads were all lily white. I told Trump about this observation. And here's a quote from Michael Cohen. Your rallies look like fucking Ku Klux Klan meetings, I said. All of your supporters are white. Instead of hoods, they are all wearing MAGA hats. You need some diversity in your audience. The optics are terrible. Now, quoting Trump. You're right, Trump agreed. Now, this is no longer a quote, but it goes on to say, he didn't care about racial justice, needless to say, and his only real goal with black voters was suppression, especially aiming his efforts at African American women in swing states like Michigan and Wisconsin and Ohio, trying to convince them that Hillary Clinton was so awful that they shouldn't bother to turn out. Quote, what do you have to lose by supporting Trump, he asked. But the real question he posed was why they should support the Clintons and their criminal justice and welfare, why they should support the Clintons and their criminal justice and welfare reforms, which proved so catastrophic for minorities. From the time I mentioned the racial component of his rallies, I noticed that there was always at least one or two black or brown men or women positioned directly behind Trump's head when he spoke. Minorities, I'm sure, were identified and recruited by the campaign team and carefully placed to appear directly in the middle of the cable news shots. The gesture wasn't aimed at minority voters so much as his base. It was a form of subliminal communications so that it wasn't racist to support a politician employing transparently racist rhetoric, the kind of reassurance that appealed to white suburban moms turned off by Trump but willing to hold their noses and vote for him, partly out of dislike for Clinton's sense of entitlement, but also because of the promise of Supreme Court justices who would make abortion illegal. Okay, that's the first quote. Please feel free to comment on those. Once again, please do it with some class, some dignity, and some of the comments I'll try to respond to in future broadcasts, but I'm going to go to the last quote, which is quite a long one, or the last excerpt from the book, which is quite quite a long one, and I hope once again you bear with me. Okay, here we go. Trump was convinced the real buyer of Maison de la Amity was Vladimir Putin. There's a bank in Switzerland that's got one and only one customer, Trump told me. There are rumors about that, I replied. I know it for a fact, Trump replied. Putin is worth more than $1 trillion. As the election wore on, I began to believe that Trump secretly wanted Putin's kind of power for himself, which is part of why I'm convinced he won't leave office voluntarily. But I will get to that subject in due course. To Trump, Putin was like the Saudi royal family or Kim Jong-un in North Korea, the incarnation of dynastic wealth and the ruling class of the planet. Everyone other than the ruling class on Earth was like an ant to his way of thinking, their lives meaningless and always subject to the whims of the true rulers of the world. Murdering an American green card holding journalist of Saudi descent writing for the Washington Post by luring him to an embassy in Turkey and butchering his body, that was just fine by Trump, as the world saw in the brutal killing of Jamal Khashoggi, a crime that has had precisely zero impact on American foreign policy with the Saudis. Here is what Trump would say when informed of the killing of a journalist. What the fuck do I care? He shouldn't have written what he did. He should have shut the fuck up. The cosmic joke was that Trump was convinced a vast swath of working-class white folks in the Midwest that he cared about their well-being. The truth was that he couldn't care less. I don't mean that as speculation or an opinion. That was a stone-cold fact during the 2016 campaign and throughout Trump's presidency to this very day. To Trump, his voters are his audience, his chumps, his patsies, his base. Guns, criminalizing abortion. Trump took up these conservative positions not because he believed in them, but because they were his path to power. That was what I meant when I told Congress that Trump is a con man. Speaking of which, let me address my own credibility for a moment before I dive into the Russian idiocy. Because I'm so often portrayed as a serial liar and an unreliable narrator, please allow me to quote from the Mueller report. This section I will cite only appeared in a footnote, which was the ultimate example of how an accusation always gets the front page headline, and the correction ends up in small print long after the damage is done. Here is what Mueller and his team said about my cooperation after I agreed to proffer evidence to them, in particular regarding the Trump-Russia nexus and the Moscow Tower, buried in a footnote 909 in Volume 2 of the report. Not exactly the front page of the New York Times. Quote, the office found Cohen's testimony in these subsequent proffer sessions to be consistent with and corroborated by other information obtained in the course of the office's investigation. The office sentencing submission in Cohen's criminal case stated, starting with his second meeting with the special counsel's office in September 2018, the defendant accepted responsibility not only for his false statements concerning the Trump Tower Moscow project, but also in his broader efforts through false statements and testimony before Congress to minimize his role and what he knew about contacts between the Trump Organization and Russian interests during the course of the campaign. The defendant, without prompting by the special counsel's office, also corrected other false and misleading statements that he had made concerning his outreach and contacts with Russian officials during the course of the campaign. Compare and contrast that with Trump's insistent refrain that collusion with Russia was a hoax, and he had no business in Russia. Now, who do you think you should believe? Hold on for a second here. Remember, talking to Mueller's lawyers under oath and on pain of perjury, perhaps an ironic statement given my present circumstances, but I can assure you that I was not going to lie or shade the truth when I cooperated with the authorities. And I won't here either. This is the straight-up truth. No ice, no mixer, just a shot of reality. Okay, those are the quotes that I'm going to read for now, and I want everyone to think about that. Once again, I want you to remember, and it's said in this book that when Michael Cohen was Trump's personal attorney, Trump called him first thing every morning and last thing every night before he went to bed. And this guy almost lost his family, almost lost everything he had, and there is no reason in the world when the jig's up that someone is going to make this stuff up. The truth is more reliable sometimes than fiction. Well, it's always more reliable than fiction, but that's why I chose to quote from this book in the first place, because when the jig's up, and you're going to tell the truth. So this is Paul. Hope you liked the first edition of Danger Ahead, and please comment freely and often. I can't say I will get to everyone's comments, but I'm going to try to. And I'm going to try and do 1 to 2 of these a week. This one should be up by tomorrow and on YouTube, and I will also share it with Facebook. Once again, I'm doing this in my elderly years, not for notoriety, but as a sense of duty to humanity, which we are all members of, and knowing that this could get far worse. My final comment is I would suggest that if you want a hypothetical view of what could happen that is highly improbable, but also very possible, you should watch The Man in the High Castle, a TV series on Amazon. And it's got a lot of seasons there, and if you want to binge on it, it's basically a story about what would have happened more or less if Hitler won the war. So anyway, that's the end of the podcast. I really hope you enjoy it. I want to continue doing it, and I want people to more than ever comment, because it's so important in the world we live in today. And remember, lastly, Trump's handling of the coronavirus. 220,000 lives lost does not mean a thing to him.